So they're talking about the Iraq War back in 2003 and the lead up to it. And, how it's somehow surprising that the action did not reflect popular will of anybody, and democratic reactions or protests were ignored, despite being very large. That is somehow seen as surprising. I just want to take this opportunity to talk a little about the way I saw things as they were happening. I was on the internet at the time. That may have been, I guess it was right before most people got on the internet. It was still kind of nerdy to be on the internet around 2003. And so I was getting, better information, and I was well aware that the IAEA had stated repeatedly and unequivocally that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And yet I was watching Colin Powell, lie in front of the United Nations. And it's kind of funny because everybody around me was saying that, they're going to invade, they're going to invade, they're going to invade. And I kept saying, well, no. This has to be just all politics. Because I understood what the facts were. I understood that there was this thing called international law. And I understood that they weren't going to be able to get there through the channels of international law. So I said, this will never happen. It'll get voted down. All the evidence is against it. Something I actually said repeatedly during that period was this. This is a direct quote from me circa 2003, or maybe 2002. Bush is stupid, but he's not that stupid. And it turns out that he was that stupid. Unfortunately for everybody. But even that isn't really what I was wrong about. What I was really wrong about was whether or not the Americans would follow international law. The truth is that, they mostly had up to that point, right? There was certainly nothing like what had happened, or what was about to happen in Iraq. If you look at the sanctions, horrible thing, 500,000 dead children, apparently worth the cost, according to, Hillary's buddy Madeline there. But it was all legal, and it was all done within the framework of the United Nations. And you can go back at all of these unquestionable, terrible things. I think maybe the only thing is, I think Thatcher's invasion of the Falklands is really the only situation that I know of before Iraq that really just kind of gave the finger to the system of international law. And that wasn't an American. That was, even Afghanistan was through the proper framework. It was with a UN mission and the whole thing, right? If you look in Canada, what is the reason Canada did not take part? The reason is because it was illegal under international law. And our Canadian Prime Minister at the time did not want to launch an action that he understood was illegal under international law. It's not some moral quandary or something, or some pacifist position. It's because it was fucking illegal, right? And so, the question of, is the government going to listen to people? I never thought they would, right? Is the government going to reflect the will of the people? Is it going to act with a mandate? Never thought it would do that either, right? Okay, that's a bunch of nonsense. It's pretty clear that's a bunch of nonsense. That seems to be what the discussion here is. But what surprised the hell out of me, and which I could not believe was actually happening until the bomb started falling, was that they would give the UN the fucking finger like that. And it was just complete disregard, okay? There's actually a vote at the United Nations that chose to not authorize force. It's not like they, they could have just like not had the votes and been like, oh well, we didn't. Sorry, batteries just went out there, and I think that's actually unexpected. That was a quick note. But it's not like they just skipped over it, right? They could have just decided that we're not going to have a vote, right? We're just going to go ahead and do it. And then you can't say that we're breaking any specific resolution. They could have, it would have been illegal. And anybody, with any semblance of reason would have seen it was illegal. But it wouldn't have, they could have come up with some kind of, weaselly, lawyery kind of way out, right? Because there wasn't a specific, like, nobody said not to, so how are you supposed to know, right? Would not hold up in any real system of law, but would probably hold up in an international court of law, because it's not real law, it's a bunch of, Yankee puppet courts, right? But they did have the vote. And the vote was specifically no. So they went through the process. Any reasonable observer would have looked at the situation and said, okay, the UN voted against it, therefore this can't happen. But they did it anyways, right? And I've been back to this point in history repeatedly, because I don't think that really much changed after 9/11, okay? They pissed them off a little. They launched an invasion of an area that they were probably going to go into eventually anyways, etc. Okay? But when Bush specifically ignored the Security Council, in fact, not ignored, but defied the Security Council, the entire world order collapsed at that moment. It took a few years for it to really, completely unravel. The point where it collapsed at that point, but then it broke into pieces when Clinton, fucked around with the Russians in Libya. Okay, that's that was the point where it went from things are breaking to things are broken, right? So there's that period of about 10 years, I guess, a little less than 10 years, of the system teetering on the brink, right? But that was the point where it ended, right? And who could have seen that coming, right? I think a lot of people are really, well, I mean, the way the media built it up was as though it was like this wasn't even a real process, right? As though the UN didn't even exist. The UN, what's that? Why does anybody have to ask the UN before we bomb a country? Well, what's that all about? Don't we have sovereignty, right? And that's kind of was the prevailing mindset, right? If you ask the average person, they wouldn't have been even able to tell you that the Security Council had a legal role to play. They wouldn't have even acknowledged it. Even if they knew it existed, they wouldn't have acknowledged it, right? And so this whole march to war that the media was leading them down, they swallowed it. And in the end, it turned out to be accurate. But a properly studious person that actually understood the situation would have looked at it and said, okay, well, first of all, there aren't any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which today everybody accepts. But if you were halfway informed in 2003, you already knew that. You didn't need, 3 years. I don't know how long it took for the media to finally start, pushing the truth, but you didn't need that because it was already available. The IAEA had the information out there, was pushing it strongly, and it was, it's the Bush administration was citing like anonymous reports from their own intelligence networks. The little bit of information that they came out and they were able to try and verify, it turns out was nonsense. It had to do with yellow cake in Nigeria. But the whole thing was presented to us completely vaguely. You could never verify it if you wanted to because they didn't actually give you any information, right? And they used that to argue against the International Atomic Energy Agency's public reports for the United Nations. And the media accepted the administration. The IAEA, it's all a bunch of communists. It's the New World Order. Nobody at NBC said that, okay, or CNN or whatever. Nobody said that, but the way that they pushed their coverage more or less implied that they were taking up the Berkshire conspiracy theory. It doesn't take a lot of journalistic integrity. In fact, it might even be the definition of journalistic integrity. Let's do that. I've put down a couple of definitions over the last few days. Let's put down another one. Journalistic integrity. The definition is accepting the objective reports of an international agency over the anonymous and unverified reports of a government agency. That's journalistic integrity. And there wasn't a single media outlet in the United States that had it. Every single one of them bought the idea of anonymous sources in the CIA as more trustworthy than the International Atomic Energy Agency. Every single one of them. Even the ones that you clueless mainstream liberals like. Yes, those guys too. They did it too. Every single one of them. Your candidate voted for it. But there was no question. If you were informed, you knew. Right? So there was that. And then you've got the administration taking that, which was clearly nonsense, and losing the debate at the United Nations. And it was clear to everybody that they were losing the debate. And it was clear to everybody that they were losing the debate because it was clear to everybody that they were lying through their teeth. They would say things that would directly contradict what everybody agreed was solid objective evidence. And they would cite their own intelligence agencies. Let's turn this around. Let's say you've got the Russians. They show up at the UN. According to our internal reports, we say that the plane was shot down by a Yankee missile. You gonna believe a word they say? Of course you're not. You're gonna say, yeah, sure, Boris, right? Have another one, right? But the people on this continent are so stupid that they're not able, every single one of them fell for that when it was the Americans. You think Colin Powell is any more trustworthy than Sergei Lavrov? In fact, I'll be honest with you, I would trust Lavrov before I would trust any American Secretary of State. I don't really trust either of them. But with Lavrov, I'd say there's a chance he's lying. With any American diplomat or Secretary of State or convoy to the envoy to the UN, okay? Anybody like that, I'd say that there's a likelihood that they're lying. They're probably lying, okay? And that's the Americans are probably lying, the Russians are maybe lying, right? You can't believe a damned word that they say. They this is a line that I like to use. They could be standing underneath a peace tower, and you'd ask them what time it is, and they'd lie to you. All you'd have to do is look up and see that they're lying, but they lie to you anyway, right? There's no shame in it. They'll just lie and lie and lie, and they don't give a fuck. So long as the historical record records their lies and forgets about the truth. Because at the end of the day, they're going to do what they want. Or so we learned in Iraq. Is that they're going to do what they want regardless of whether they win their vote. And then they'll fuck with the historical record to make it look like that we're right all the whole time. And if you really understand what happened in Iraq, it should completely abolish your faith in history. Because if you saw it happen once, how many times has it happened before? Nor is this a new idea. We like to attach this idea to Orwell. This idea of rewriting the past to Orwell. But if you know a little bit about history, you know that how can I say this quickly? Why don't you study Byzantine history and the conflict between what's the word for it? There's a word for it, but the anti-icon people and the pro-icon people. Icons are little pictures of Jesus or Mary that Orthodox Christians pray to. Western Christians would consider the practice most would consider it to be praying to a false idol. Protestants would be livid. They wouldn't recognize it. Even Catholics think it's kind of funny. But it's all of the Eastern churches, including the Russian Orthodox Church, but the Byzantine Church, which was the Eastern Roman Church centered in what is now Istanbul, was at the time a city called Constantinople, the capital of the Roman Empire. And what would happen was that you had these two groups of people. One was in favor of the icons and worshiping the icons. The other was opposed to it, thought it was idolatry, worshiping a false idol. And every time one of them took over, they would erase the history of the last one. And the result is that there's this 400-year period in Roman history. And we're not talking early Roman. This is the very end of the Roman Empire, right? So we're talking. It's I think it's maybe. Well, it was around the same time as the Arabs. Don't quote my dates on this precisely. I could be off by a few centuries. But somewhere. Well, it was in the Middle Ages, right? Middle Ages, Dark Ages. So somewhere around 800 to 1200. Maybe a little earlier, maybe a little later. Or maybe not. But around that area. But we're not talking thousands and thousands of years ago. We're not talking lost ancient history, right? This is the historical period. It's the same period as Marco Polo or Charlemagne, right? A little later than Charlemagne. There are historical records in this period. It's not at all before them. But we have a dark age there. Um, or let me rephrase that. There are written records, but we have to be very skeptical about them because we know that we're erased and rewritten over and over again. And at the end of the day, the winners wrote the history, but we should have no faith in it because we know it was just wiped out and wiped out and wiped out. And you can go back before that, right? When the Romans destroyed Carthage and Corinth, but mostly Carthage, the intent was to completely erase Carthage from history. And they were conscious about it. They knew what they were doing. You can go back before that. It's a common theme in Egyptian history, or what we've been able to reconstruct from Egyptian history, is that was the punishment for being a bad pharaoh, is he would be erased from history. And they had, um, uh, a non-linear concept of time, right? So when you erased someone from history in Egypt, that you were really doing them a major, massive slight, right? So this is not something that Orwell made up. Even the Catholic Church, with some of the Crusades they launched. When we think of the Crusades, we think of Christians attacking Muslims. We forget that those were only a couple of the Crusades. There were actually more Crusades launched within Europe itself, attacking what they called heretics, which the Catholic Church saw the Muslims as heretics, right? For quite a while. If you look at more than one source, early Christian source, or the Christian source early in the Muslim period, they talk about Muslims as though they're an offset of Christianity, right? They compare them to Aryans. Aryans were people mostly of Germanic descent that believed that Jesus was a human being, which they attached to the Muslims because they thought that Jesus was a prophet, right? It took a long time before the Christian Church could accept the idea that Islam was a different religion. They always thought of it as just a heretical offshoot, and that was really the basis of the Crusades. If the Christian Church really thought of Islam as a different religion, the Crusades probably would not have happened. And so there were these other crusades that were launched. There was one launched in the south of France, for example, and it was meant to completely erase the Cathars that lived there, which was a different offshoot. Completely erase them from history, right? So this idea of erasing people from history, erasing ideas, empires, religious movements, the whole thing. It's very old, right? You can imagine that I have lost my train of thought. Yeah, I was talking about Iraq and how, yeah. So I mean, it's not a brand new idea or anything, but it's not something that I think we really accept as plausible in the modern world, right? It's something that we write off as conspiracy theories, right? But it's actually really scary because if you look at Iraq and you look what they did in Iraq and you look how they covered it up and how they're in the process of erasing it, look at a textbook that they teach kids on Iraq. Okay, it's the state's line. There's no mention of anything else. Let me ask you this question: in 50 years' time, are they going to say that it's a conspiracy theory that there were never weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? The people that say that there were never weapons of mass destruction in Iraq are mass destruction deniers. Now, I'm not exactly saying what I'm implying. What I'm saying is that it opens up a concept of doubt. And it's a big problem. Because when we can see them lying, and we can see them doctoring, and we can see them fabricating at such a blatantly, in your face way, why should you trust anything else that they told you? Do I have any direct evidence for things that happened, 70 years ago, 75 years ago? I don't. I have no idea. But I do know that if I can't trust the person that's telling me what, then I simply can't trust them. And that's a big problem. That can't happen. If we're to have history, and if we're to remember atrocities and make sure they never happen again, we need to ensure that we can trust our concept of the past. I'm not the first person that's pointed that out either. In fact, that's a big center point in modern philosophy, or maybe pre-modern philosophy, right? This idea that history, at the least we have history. If we can't trust anything else, we have history. You don't even have history. At least you don't when you see them doing what they've done in Iraq. And that's why I was so certain this can't happen. There was an international law in place. And they went through the process and they lost their case. And it was clear they were going to lose their case. And so on that level, I was right. That it shouldn't have happened. But it did. Again, no one should be surprised that they're not going to listen to people, that they don't care about the popular perception. But international law is something different. And I can tell you that it certainly changed my perception of things. It made me realize that there really aren't these rules that I thought there were. And there really isn't anything reigning in this, or at least there aren't any more. And there really is nothing reigning in the empire anymore. And that's a huge problem. And it has to be dealt with somehow. Unfortunately, and living a block from the United States, I state this with no great enjoyment, but unfortunately, there's only going to be one way to take this empire down. And it's going to be that you're going to have to win a war against them. That's a lot to extrapolate from a split-second decision almost 15 years ago. But it just goes to show you that when people tell you that things have consequences in the long run, they're not making shit up. So yeah, that's I still have trouble believing that it happened. Like I said, the irony is that the people that I knew, the people that I was discussing this with, they had no such qualms. They saw on TV that, Bush said he was going to bomb Iraq, and so they thought that they were going to bomb Iraq, right? And it was just like fed nonsense, garbage in, garbage out, right? And it was the person that actually had the understanding of things and was trying to put events that were happening in the context of what the legal framework that existed should have implied, that ended up with a deeply flawed assessment because I understood the international law and they didn't. Again, such is the world we live in. But it was a very, very important event. Whether I managed, well, I'll say it again. I said it many times at the time, and I'll say it again. I knew Bush was stupid. I didn't think he was that stupid. As it turns out, he was.